So let's touch some more on this. So limited agency, you're representing both the buyer and the seller. Here's the problem. I think inherently you can't do both. At least Indiana has adopted this policy now that we have to disclose this prior to adopting limited agency in writing from both clients in advance.
Could you not have just like two different agents in your same company?
That's what they do. That's what most of your bigger companies do, is they have two bigger agents. You go see David Brenton or Jeff Paxson or Scott Veerkamp, and somebody calls in and goes, hey, I saw your sign, and he's like, okay, hold on a second. Let me hand you to our buyer's agent. And you're going to get to the next thing that's called in-house agency, when you have a buyer and a seller from two different agents in the same company. All right, it's called in-house agency. We're going to talk about it. It's called in-house because both people work for me. It's not out-house because that would be shitty. All right? So if John worked for me and had the buyer, and you worked for me and had the seller, that's not limited agent, even though you're both inside of my agency. All right?
So the contracts are both with you because it all goes back to you.
But I can separate their conscious. All right? Now, there's a loophole in the loophole. All right? That loophole is if I'm one of the people participating as the managing broker, then it is limited agency. So if John's got the listing and I, as the managing broker, have a client that buys it, that's limited agency. That's a loophole. That's why most companies don't have their managing. I don't broker. All right? I've closed one deal in 2 years. And that was his parents. All right? And I only did it as a favor to him. For this reason.
Yeah, just to avoid that.
Yeah, so I don't have this potential problem. All right? So you must disclose limited agency in advance. So you, which is ironically funny to me. The seller, you got to call the seller up and go, hey, I got a buyer wants to buy. I'm going to represent them. Do you mind? And they say, sure, go ahead. Then you got to go to the buyer, and here's the funny part, who just called you on the cell phone from the yard sign, and you still got to go, hey, you understand that's my number, and you called me. I got this house listed. Is it okay that I represent the seller and you? Oh, sure, go ahead. Sign this form. Now we'll take you in the house. Either party can say no, and I've had it happen one time. All right? I did a lot of work with an investor, and we sold a 12-unit apartment building, and the buyer was also one of my clients. He called me up and said, hey, I want to see Sherby's property. Sherby says, is that Stan Gervitz? I said, yeah. He goes, I don't want you to be both sides. He goes, you know all my accounting, you know all my property holdings, you know too much. Do not represent Stan in this deal. So I had to call Betsy, my partner, and said, I want you to represent Stan, but here's the good point. He's going to write an offer, and I'm going to charge you a referral fee for this, by the way, so I can make money off of it. But it has to be disclosed, written permission in advance. Undisclosed dual agency violates the law. Probably one of the number one violated rules that new agents get caught on. All right? And we go back to the example I talked about today where the guy called you and you answered the phone and they said, oh, I'll meet you at Starbucks and you want to be, I can express agency. Remember that example we talked about? One of the ones we didn't touch on then, and now we should pick up. Oh, and by the way, you got to sign the limited agency form because you called me on my sign. You see what I'm saying? I was sitting in the office during hope time. You called me on the sign that you said you saw. Remember my example? And I said, well, I'm going to meet you at Starbucks. Now you can be the buyer. That would make me limited agent. So you got to sign that form too.
So it'd be in your best interest to bring that up before you make the meeting, though, wouldn't it? Like, me not, like, I am representing the buyer that you're calling on.
Would it be in your best interest to bring that up? Probably not. I don't know about you, but I can sell something a lot better sitting across the table from somebody than on the phone. All right?
As a realtor, if you're selling your own place.
Your own personal residence or investment property.
Would that be considered
If they're coming through you, yes. You would be a limited agent. And you probably should cover your aspirations a lot better and say, hey, you understand I'm a licensed agent, so I either want you to sign a non-agency agreement or you're going to sign a limited agency agreement, one of the two. Either we're going to go all the way across the river and I'm going to be your agent, or you're going to sign something saying I'm not helping you a darn bit. One of the two. All right? Seller representation, buyer, property management, dual, undisclosed. Over on page 149 is where we talked about, there's the designated agency, that's the in-house. The key I want you to remember is limited agency is working with the buyer and the seller on the same deal. You got to have both parts of that. I can have a buyer over here and a seller over here, and that's not a problem. All right? I can also have multiple agencies going on at the same time. I have got general power of attorney with my mother. I also property manage, so I got general agency with Randeep, and I broker for his parents. So I would have special agency with them. So I can have multiple agencies too. I just want to make sure you covered that so we're clear. But the point to limited agency that you got to make sure you're aware of, hint, 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 buyer and seller on the same deal. If they're a different deal, that's not limited agency. I can have a buyer over here and a seller over there. It's the buyer and seller on the same deal. That creates a limited agency. Non-agency, that's what we talked about earlier. That's a form, transactional or facilitator, so that if the deal blows up, you don't get caught. All right, customer level service there in the book on page 150. What I want you to do is write these 6 words in the book. This is my homage to my mentor, Dan Miller, who's no longer living. These are his famous 6 words that I love. Customer level service can easily be defined as this: do no harm, do no help. You cannot lie to them. You cannot mislead them. You have to be honest and fair in your dealings. But you don't help them either. That is how you treat a customer. Once again, they call in and go, hey, is the house for sale on 12 Smith Street? I think I saw your property. Yes, it is. That's customer level. How many bedrooms? It's 4 bedrooms. That's customer level. Can I get a better deal? Can't talk to you about that. That's a licensed required activity, and I'm just a receptionist.
So essentially the same way to think about it with what you just said about you're just the receptionist. So a common level, customer level service would be the same for like an agent if they weren't, essentially it'd be like if you weren't licensed. That's how you have to treat them.
Yes. Customer level service would be like if you weren't licensed, any questions you could ask would be customer level. All right? You can give your opinion. Opinions are fine as long as they are not given to mislead or in a different manner. Yes, I understand this is the toxic waste dump, but it's the best view of the toxic waste dump there is. All right? That's my opinion. That's called puffing. That's called puffing, not huffing. That's something else. As opposed to fraud, which is where you actually intentionally misrepresent something to paint a different picture to persuade someone to do something. Like you can't stand with your fingers behind your back crossed going, no, I-69's not going through here. Especially if you know it, that's fraud. Seems pretty obvious. When you lie, that's fraud. Now, here's another one that's harder to understand. Negligent misrepresentation. You should have known better, and you still made a mistake. For instance, we are going to have a whole chapter on environmental, which is going to talk about lead-based paint. We have a lead-based paint form for every house built before 1978. You cannot stand in front of a judge and go, hey, dude, I forgot about that, sorry. The judge is going to go, no, you should have known that. You're a professional, you have classes, you have training on it. Every house before 1978 has a lead-based paint form. You were negligent in your representation, you are found guilty. That's called negligent misrepresentation. You should have known the statement was wrong or needed or required, and you failed to do it anyway. When we disclose things, we have talked about that you would disclose what's called material defects. There is another type of defect I want to talk about. There is a defect called a latent defect. Latent means unknown or undiscovered. Like if I said, hey, look at this room. It's a really great room. I'll sell it to you. And then you have an inspection, and your inspector finds termites. Termites, first of all, you guys know you can't call them termites anymore, right? They're now termite Americans. All right? No, technically you can't. They are wood-destroying insects. You got to be trained to use the word termite.
So you can actually get
WDIs, yes. Yes, you would get in trouble for that. You do not write termites, you write WDIs. What is that? Weapons of mass destruction. No, wait. WDIs are wood-destroying insects. Unless, of course, you've gone to Purdue for the 3-week class and can identify termites, then you can use it. Just like you can't say mold. Mold, you can't say mold. It's a black-like substance. Unless you are trained as a mold inspector.
It's a what substance?
Black-like, mold-like. It's black, mold-like substance. It's not mold. Can't say that. Not trained in it. Well, I am, because environmental is where I came from. But termites, you can't say. The property was full of WDIs. Could be carpenter ants. You don't know that.
What, you defaming termites? They were actually wood carpenter ants?
They could be wood carpenter ants.
You slandered that termite.
Yeah.
Termite.
Being sued by a termite. So where were we? Latent defect would be a termite American. So now, a latent defect would be something that you can't be found without an inspection or a visual person that really knew what they were doing. Mold in the woodwork, termites, foundation crack might be one. Hey, I didn't know that. Do what?
Like the removal of a wall is supposed to be
Load bearing? Yeah, maybe the beams are bowed and your structural engineer found it. I didn't know it. That's a latent defect. Problem is once it becomes a latent defect and you find it, it now becomes a material defect that you have to disclose from here on out. All right? Now we're back into that question of, well, I had termite Americans in my house. I had them cleaned and fixed. Do I disclose it? Here's the black, here's the white. And we go back to that, well, if I had a hole in the roof and I fixed it, would you disclose it? I don't know. There's some other disclosures I want to talk about. We're running a little long, but we're not going to do a new one. There's this thing called a stigmatized property. A stigmatized property is a property that has gained a reputation in such a manner that the general public doesn't really want it. There are 5 stigmatized properties. or 5 reasons that would stigmatize or psychologically affect a property. Psychologically. We used to do that to our kids all the time. P is in psychology. O is in possum. And they're like, what? P is in pneumonia. There are 5 psychologically affected properties. The first one is if a property has someone that dies in it. Homicide, suicide, natural causes, doesn't matter. They bit the big one. If they bought the farm and now you can buy the farm because they bought the farm, that's a psychologically affected property. Commission of a felony.
That's disclosed along with like any and all those other disclosures. Someone died.
Hold on. We're getting there. Don't ask that question yet. Let's define psychologically affected property, and then I'll tell you what the disclosure is. Commission of a felony, like rape. Gang-related activity. East Side.
Are these separate or are we still on number 2?
No, that was number 3.
Oh, okay.
Death, felony, whatever I just told you. Gang-related, manufacture of methamphetamines, manufacture of illegal substance, and the discharge of a weapon by a policeman in the line of duty.
Say that one again.
The discharge of a weapon by a policeman in the line of duty. So here's what I'm thinking. If you have a gang cooking meth, that's a felony. A cop breaks in, shoots one of them and kills him, you can get all 5 of them at one time.
So the 5th one is like if a police officer kills somebody in the house.
I didn't say kill somebody. If a police officer discharges his weapon in the line of duty, so he could just fire at someone. Now here's the key. All 5 of those create what we call a psychologically affected property, meaning that people don't want them because for some reasons. They are not, everybody listen to what I'm telling you, they are not required to be voluntarily disclosed. Hey, we have lead. Hey, we got the roof, the hole in the roof, but we're not going to tell you about the 2 dudes that were killed in the house.
Only if they ask.
Maybe. The question was only if they ask. The answer is definitely maybe. Because the law says if you are asked, you cannot give misleading information.
You have a duty to disclose what you know, right?
No. It says you cannot give misleading information. So you could literally say, sorry, we at the Modular Group have adopted a policy that we don't discuss these topics at all.
So even if you said, you specifically said you wanted to know if the property is stigmatized in any way.
If you come to me and said, did someone die on this property? I could tell you that we at the Modular Group have adopted a policy that we don't talk about these kind of issues. I didn't give you misleading information. What I can't say is no, because that would be a lie. The state allows us to go, look, shiny keys, and distract them. Squirrel! All right? Now, if you press and go, my decision is entirely 100% based on this answer, then I have to get with my client and go, look, dude, she's pressing me for this. Do you want to say, you want me to tell her or not? I want you to stick to your guns. Okay. We at the Modular Group have decided we don't talk about this. And you go, well, I'm walking away from the deal. Okay.
Would there be any other source to get that information?
Probably.
Public records, right?
Maybe. I don't know if a public record would get tied. I mean, if it was a commission of a felony, I mean, you have to look at felony, but it wouldn't be on the recorder's office.
No, it wouldn't be like that.
Someone died, it wouldn't be in the recorder's office.
There's a registry for manufacturing of illegal substances.
Yeah, only if it's been arrested. You know, that manufacturer list only happens if that house has been busted.
They
They don't know every house. So if they made meth there and left, they don't know. All right? Usually when someone says, has someone died here, what you would typically say is step over the chalk outline and we'll have a discussion about it.
So manufacture of illegal substance includes more than just drugs, right? Like if somebody's creating pipe bombs and stuff like that.
I think that would be the intention. I don't know. It just says illegal substance. All right?
So there's a question on the test that's like, if you're showing a client a house and they ask if there's a debt, and they give you the options of like, do you disclose it, do you not disclose it?
Well, if your option is yes to disclose or no to disclose, you would choose yes. Because the third option would be you choose not to talk about it, which is a legal valid option. All right?
Unless it becomes a marketable item, like something
Yeah.
famous died in this house.
No, I'll tell you what, we actually get a lot of questions. There's two other things that I think would cause stigmatized problem that I've gotten more often. I've marketed at least one house that had someone die in it. I know for a fact. It was my cousin's house and our grandmother died in the house. All right? But more often than not, I get another one all the time. Is it haunted? Hey, get that one all the time. I don't know, ask the ghost. All right? I had one where the girl's like, is it haunted? I'm like, and the guy's like, that'd be cool if it was.
Oh, yeah.
Sweet, dude.
Don't try to sell Hill House.
All right.
A lot of houses that people have died in.
Well, that's what I tell them. I said, dude, hospitals didn't become in vogue to the 50s or 60s. You get those houses that were built in the 1890s downtown, I can almost guarantee you someone's died in them. I showed a home out near Martinsville that actually had a viewing parlor in their front room. It had a place in the window, and I asked the owner of the house, he goes, oh, this is the viewing parlor, because in the days of old, that's where all the family, when they'd have funerals, would use the big main house in the farm, and he said, this is the viewing parlor.
I went to a house not too long ago and it had a hospital bed and smelled like death. And that was like
Smelled like death.
it smelled
Kind of like the Colts locker room.
fire.
Megan's Law is for the sexual offender. Remember, Megan's Law is not a reporting law. You actually have to seek it out. All right? And it's like indianasheriffs.org, watchdog.com. In our purchase agreement, it literally has that web address so that when you're writing the purchase agreement with your buyer, if they have a question, you could go, hey, I don't represent the neighborhood. I can't answer that. But here's the website that you can go look and get the state's information. I literally had one that got stopped. My buyer said, hey, we love this house. So we bought it. And I had showed like 9 houses, and I was kind of happy they were wanting me to write an offer. I didn't get back home, and the husband called me. He's like, dude, cancel the offer. And she had gone on the website, and it was a good catch on her part, although they had no children, and they were above the age of children. They just, their house was like here, and there was like 8 spots around it. They had no children. I guess maybe their children were grown, maybe it was grandchildren, but she said, well, yeah, we're not going to write that offer.
But sex offender can also be a rapist.
Do what?
But it's listed what they are. Right.
It's listed, but they're very vague too.
Yeah, oh, I know.
Yeah. All right, I think that's going to be chapter 9 for us.